that user research, essentially. I think the amount of things that start without customer involvement, not just in voice, but in general, I think a lot of things start without customer involvement, and there's nothing worse than getting so far down the road before you actually validate what it is that you're trying to do in the first place. There's a really good book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup. I don't know if you've come across it before, Chithra. Yeah, it's wicked. And one of the concepts in there that we try and tend to use is it's the concept of trying to do, well, there's one thing called a smoke test, which is what can you do that kind of tries to identify signals of market demand. And so there's a really good story in there around the guy who created Buffer. I can't remember his name. Buffer is a social media scheduling tool. You can just schedule tweets, and you can create a big list of tweets and it'll schedule it to post things during the week or whatever. And he kind of had an idea around this social media scheduling tool, and he kind of his smoke test to try and see if there was any market demand was he sent a tweet that said something along the lines of join here for Twitter scheduling, for a Twitter scheduling tool or something like that. And his aim was to just see whether anyone actually responded, and if people signed up. And if people did sign up, then it was a signal to him that there was a potential market for it. It's harder to do that with voice because you need to create something to put in front of people in the first place. You can't just kind of run an advertising campaign and say, hey, ask XYZ assistant to do this, if there's nothing there when they do. So that's why we rely on customer research and user research. If you can get in front of people, if you're a hobbyist and you're doing it yourself, that might be friends and family. Or if you can identify who your target market is a little bit more solidly, then maybe you can go out onto Facebook and spend 20 quid on some advertising to try and recruit some people, or go to something like SurveyMonkey, run a little survey on SurveyMonkey and get an opt-in via an email to then have a follow-up conversation, things like that. If you can get in front of your target market and try and first of all identify what their pain points are and what their real needs are, and just to validate whether or not there's something in your idea, that's a good first step. And the next thing is to figure out what would an actual conversation look like. And so that's where the role play comes in. So we role play as often as we possibly can. So you'll get a potential customer or a user research participant on the line. You will kind of have the discussion around their pain points and their needs and things like that. And then you would just simulate a conversation, whatever that idea that you have is, whatever your use case is. Simulate an active conversation with them to try and figure out whether or not your idea is a half decent idea, whether it does solve a genuine problem, and then two, what would an actual conversation look like if you were going to create something. So that's the where I would always advise, and that's the same not just if you're a hobbyist, it's also the same if you're working within an enterprise or an agency, or you're working with clients, anything like that, is starting with customer research and trying to identify real customer pain points throughout their journey is always the place I would start.